September 19th, 1948. 8:47 p.m. Wells Restaurant, 135th Street, Harlem. The night air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes shirts stick to skin and tempers run short. Inside the restaurant, ceiling fans pushed hot air in lazy circles while Dizzy Gillespie's trumpet wailed from the jukebox. 40 people laughed. 8 lived their lives unaware that history was about to walk through the door. Sal Bonano walked through those doors with 6 armed soldiers and a death wish he didn't know he had. The man they called the Butcher stood 6'2", 230 pounds of muscle wrapped in a tailored Italian suit that cost more than most Harlem families made in a year. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was slicked back with pomade that caught the light. Behind him, 6 guns bulged under expensive jackets, one for each bodyguard who followed him like shadows. They didn't bother hiding them. That was the point. Fear is a weapon, and Sal Bonano knew how to use it. He'd used it in Brooklyn when he carved up a card cheat and left pieces of him in 4 different boroughs. He'd used it in the Bronx when he burned down a nightclub because the owner was 2 days late on protection money. 17 men had died by Sal's hands. 17 families destroyed. 17 funerals. And now he was in Bumpy Johnson's restaurant, about to say the one thing you never say to the godfather of Harlem. What happened next would change the power structure of organized crime in New York forever. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't pull a gun, didn't throw a punch, didn't raise his voice above a whisper. He just said 6 words that made Sal Bonano's blood run cold. 6 words that made the man called the Butcher apologize like a schoolboy caught stealing. 6 words that sent him running out of Harlem and made the 5 families call an emergency meeting. This is the story of what those 6 words were and why they were more dangerous than any weapon. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Harlem in 1948. This wasn't the Harlem of tourist brochures or romantic movies. This was a kingdom carved out of concrete and survival, ruled by a man who understood power better than any Ivy League professor or Wall Street banker. Bumpy Johnson was 41 years old in September 1948, and he'd spent 25 of those years building something the Italian mob couldn't stomach: a black empire. Harlem wasn't supposed to have kings, not black ones anyway. The script was simple. Black folks worked for the Italians, the Irish, the Jews. They collected garbage, shined shoes, ran numbers for white bosses who took 90% and threw back pennies. That was the natural order, at least according to the men who wrote the rules in smoke-filled rooms in Little Italy and Greenwich Village. But Bumpy Johnson never learned to read their script. Or maybe he read it and decided to burn it. By 1948, he controlled the entire numbers operation in Harlem. Every bet, every payout, every dollar that changed hands in the policy game flowed through Bumpy's fingers. Millions annually. Real money. Generational wealth. The kind of money that made the 5 families lose sleep at night. The numbers game itself was beautiful in its simplicity, elegant in its brutality. People bet nickels, dimes, quarters on 3-digit numbers derived from stock market figures or horse race results. If your number hit, you won big, sometimes 50 to 1, sometimes 100 to 1. If it didn't, and most times it didn't, the house kept your money. But it wasn't really gambling to the people of Harlem. It was economics disguised as hope. It was hope crystallized into arithmetic, transformed into something you could hold in your hand, write on a slip of paper, pass to a runner on a street corner. Hope that maybe this week you'd hit the number and finally buy your daughter that winter coat she needed, the one she'd been asking for since October. Hope that you could pay rent without begging your landlord for mercy, without seeing that look of contempt in his eyes. Hope that for once, just once, you'd catch a break in a world designed to break you. systematically and without remorse. A brilliant black woman named Stephanie St. Clair invented the numbers game in Harlem back in the 1920s. Madame Queen, they called her. She was royalty before Bumpy was a prince. But when Dutch Schultz and the Italian mob decided they wanted her operation in the early 30s, they came at her with guns and grenades and the full weight of corrupt police officers on their payroll. They burned her businesses, beat her runners, killed her friends. They nearly destroyed her. That's when she went to Bumpy Johnson in 1932. She walked into the dingy apartment where he lived with a proposition that would change both their lives. "Protect my operation," she told him, "and I'll make you the most powerful man in Harlem." Bumpy kept his word. He didn't just protect her operation. He expanded it, refined it, turned it into something unstoppable. And by 1948, Stephanie St. Clair had retired to a quiet life, and Bumpy Johnson sat on a throne built from the foundation she'd laid. The Italians hated it. Not because they didn't respect hustle, they respected hustle. But in their world, there was a natural hierarchy, and black men belonged at the bottom of it, working for them, paying tribute to them, certainly not running their own empires. Frank Costello, the most powerful mobster in New York, tried negotiation first. He sent word through intermediaries. Bumpy refused. Vito Genovese sent threats. Bumpy ignored them like he ignored bad weather. Joe Bonano, one of the original Five Family's bosses, he sent his nephew, Sal Bonano, the butcher, the man who didn't negotiate. He eliminated problems. Wells' restaurant sat on 135th Street like a crown jewel that didn't know it was a crown jewel, or maybe didn't care. From the outside, it looked modest, almost humble. A simple storefront with a red awning faded by years of harsh summer sun. Windows that needed cleaning but somehow never got cleaned. A door that stuck when it rained and groaned when you opened it. A neon sign buzzed overhead, the W flickering on and off like it couldn't decide whether to stay or go. But everyone who mattered in Harlem came through those doors. Musicians whose names would echo through history. Men like Count Basie and Duke Ellington, who'd sit in those booths and plan tours between bites of cornbread. Preachers who commanded congregations of thousands. Men who could make you weep with their sermons and fear God with their fury. Numbers runners who handled more cash weekly than most banks. Men with quick hands and quicker minds. Politicians who needed Bumpy's blessing more than they needed votes, because in Harlem, Bumpy's endorsement was worth more than any political machine. Even cops, the ones honest enough to admit they couldn't control Harlem without Bumpy's permission. The ones who understood that real power doesn't come from a badge. They all came to Wells' restaurant because it was neutral ground, sacred ground. You could have beef with someone on the street. You could owe them money, hate their guts, plan to kill them tomorrow. But inside those walls, you respected the peace. Bumpy's peace. The interior was all red leather booths worn smooth by decades of conversations, checkered tablecloths that had seen better days, scuffed linoleum floors that creaked in all the right places. The smell of fried chicken and collard greens hung in the air like incense in a church. The jukebox in the corner played jazz, always jazz, the soundtrack of Harlem's heartbeat. Bumpy's booth was in the back corner, positioned with the precision of a military installation. Clear view of both doors, clear view of the kitchen, back against a solid wall. Nobody could surprise him. Nobody could trap him. After 2 decades in the game, Bumpy Johnson didn't take chances. He engineered certainty. That night, September 19th, the restaurant was packed. 40 people, maybe more. A Thursday night in Harlem, and Wells' restaurant was the place to be. The jukebox was playing Dizzy Gillespie's Manteca, the trumpet notes cutting through cigarette smoke that curled toward the ceiling like ghosts of conversations past. Bumpy sat in his usual booth. His wife Mamie sat across from him. She was elegant in that effortless way some women have, the kind of elegance that doesn't come from money or fashion, but from an unshakable sense of self. The kind of woman who could silence a room just by walking into it. Not because she demanded attention, but because she deserved it. Bumpy was eating a ribeye steak, medium rare, cutting it with the precision he applied to everything in his life. Methodical, controlled, no wasted motion. Each piece exactly the same size, each bite calculated. He'd learned in prison that discipline in small things builds discipline in large things. Control your steak, control your empire. That's when the door opened and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sal Bonano filled the doorway like a thundercloud. Behind him came his crew, 6 men, all muscle, all carrying heat. You could see the bulges under their tailored jackets. 45s, maybe 38s. Definitely enough firepower to turn Wells' restaurant into a morgue. The restaurant noticed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The couple at table 4, they'd been laughing about something. The laughter died in their throats. The old man at the bar, a numbers runner who'd been counting money, his hands went still. Even the jukebox seemed to get quieter, like it knew something terrible was about to happen. Sal walked straight to Bumpy's table. Didn't ask permission, didn't wait to be invited. Just walked through that restaurant like he owned it, his crew fanning out behind him in a semicircle of implied violence. He stopped at Bumpy's table and stood there, looking down at Bumpy like he was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of an expensive shoe. "Bumpy Johnson," Sal said. His voice was loud, theatrical, designed to humiliate. "We need to talk." Bumpy didn't look up, just kept cutting his steak. Slow, precise. The knife made a soft scraping sound against the porcelain plate that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "I'm eating," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was calm, almost bored. Like Sal Bonano and his 6 gunmen were no more interesting than a fly buzzing near his food. Sal smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a predator gives you before it strikes. The kind of smile that had preceded 17 murders. "Yeah, I can see that," Sal said. "Nice restaurant you got here. Real quaint, real authentic. But here's the thing, Bumpy. My Uncle Joe, he's got a problem. Actually, he's got several problems. But the biggest one is you." Bumpy still didn't look up. Just cut another piece of steak. Mamie did look up, though. She stared at Sal with the kind of cold contempt that could freeze blood in veins. The look a queen gives to a peasant who forgot to bow. "See?" Sal continued, walking around the table now, his crew's hands drifting toward their weapons. "The thing is, my uncle thinks it's time for Harlem to get with the program. The numbers game, that's Italian business now. Always should have been. We built this city. We run this city. And it's time you people remembered that." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. You could hear someone breathing heavy near the kitchen. You could hear the clock on the wall ticking. You could hear the refrigerator humming its mechanical song. "So here's how this is going to work," Sal said, stopping at Bumpy's shoulder, looming over him. "You're going to step aside. Hand over your operation. We'll give you a taste. Be generous about it. 10% for your trouble. You can keep your little restaurant. Keep playing the big man for your people. But the real money, that stays with us, where it belongs." Bumpy set down his knife, picked up his napkin, dabbed the corners of his mouth with the same care a surgeon uses to close an incision. Then he looked up at Sal Bonano for the first time. His eyes were calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes before hurricanes. "That's a generous offer," Bumpy said evenly. "But I'm going to have to decline." Sal's smile disappeared like it had never existed. "You're making a mistake." "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," Bumpy replied. "This ain't one of them." That's when Sal Bonano said it. The word, the slur. The one thing you never say to a black man in his own establishment, in front of his wife, in front of his people, in front of 40 witnesses who would carry that insult to their graves. The air in the restaurant changed in that instant, became heavy, dangerous, charged like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. "Listen," he said, and then he used it, the N-word. Hard R, loud, deliberate. Designed to humiliate and diminish and reduce Bumpy Johnson to nothing more than a racial slur. To remind him and everyone in that restaurant that in Sal's world, in the world outside those doors, black folks were still just that word. No matter how much money they had, no matter how much power they wielded. The fork Mamie was holding hit her plate with a sharp clink that echoed like a gunshot in a canyon. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Not the kind of silence where people pause to listen. The kind where everyone stops breathing because they're calculating their survival odds. The kind where time itself seems to freeze, where seconds stretch into eternities. Somebody's glass started to tip over on a table near the window, tipping in slow motion, but nobody moved to catch it. It fell, hit the floor, shattered. The sound of breaking glass was the only sound in the universe. Bumpy's expression didn't change, didn't flinch, didn't show anger or surprise or hurt. But everyone in that restaurant who knew Bumpy Johnson, everyone who understood what he was capable of, everyone who'd seen what happened to men who crossed him, they felt their blood turn to ice water. Because Bumpy Johnson sitting perfectly still was more dangerous than most men in motion. His right hand moved slowly, deliberately, reached into his vest pocket. Sal's 6 bodyguards all tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, 45s clearing leather, safeties clicking off. The sound of hammers being cocked back seemed impossibly loud. But Bumpy didn't pull a gun. He pulled out his razor, the same straight razor he'd carried since he was 16 years old. The one he'd used in prison when 3 men tried to kill him and ended up in the hospital instead. The one he'd used in 1935 when a cop tried to shake him down and learned that some black men don't shake. The one that had carved his reputation into the flesh of men who underestimated him. He placed it on the table gently, right next to his steak knife. The blade caught the light from the overhead lamp and gleamed like a promise. "You brought 6 men," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was so calm it was terrifying. "6 guns into my restaurant, and you think that makes you dangerous." Sal tried to laugh it off, tried to reclaim the dominance he'd walked in with. "I think it makes me smart." "No," Bumpy said. "It makes you ignorant." He stood up slowly, folded his napkin with the same precision he'd used to cut his steak, placed it on the table like he was setting a table for dinner rather than preparing for war. The 6 bodyguards all had their weapons out now. 6 guns pointed at one man. One unarmed man in a vest and shirt sleeves who looked about as concerned as someone discussing the weather. "You see these people?" Bumpy said, gesturing to the 40 people in the restaurant. "You think they're just customers? Just innocent folks eating dinner?" Sal looked around. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his eyes like water seeping through a crack in a dam. "Let me educate you, Sal. That man by the door, his name is Thomas Reed. I paid his daughter's hospital bills when she got pneumonia, and the hospital wouldn't treat her because her skin was the wrong color. That woman in the red dress, her husband used to beat her. Put her in the hospital twice. I made sure he stopped, permanently. That kid washing dishes in the back. The cops tried to frame him for a murder he didn't commit because they needed to close a case. I made sure he stayed free. Bumpy took a step closer. Sal's bodyguards raised their weapons higher, fingers on triggers, but Bumpy didn't stop walking. Every person in this restaurant owes me something, Bumpy continued. Not because I demanded it, not because I threatened them or extorted them or forced them, because I earned it. I protected them when the police wouldn't. I fed them when they were hungry. I stood up for them when the whole world was trying to push them down. You brought 6 guns into my house, Sal. But I've got 40 soldiers. They're just not wearing suits. Sal swallowed hard, glanced around the room again. The faces staring back at him weren't afraid. They were waiting for Bumpy's signal. The old man at the bar had his hand under the counter. The woman in the red dress had opened her purse. Thomas Reed by the door had stepped forward, blocking the exit. This wasn't a restaurant anymore. It was a trap. And Sal Bonano had walked right into it. Now, Bumpy said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I'm going to give you a choice. You can apologize to my wife for using that word in her presence. You can apologize to every person in this room for disrespecting them in their own community. Then you can walk out of here and tell your Uncle Joe that Harlem is not for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, or... He picked up the razor, opened it slowly. The blade caught the light again. The sound of the blade locking into place was like a bone breaking. Or you can find out why they call this Bumpy's Kingdom. Sal Bonano had killed 17 men in his career. He'd broken bones, burned businesses, extorted millions. He'd walked into rooms filled with armed enemies and walked out covered in their blood. He wasn't used to being afraid. Fear was something other people felt. But standing there in that restaurant, surrounded by 40 silent witnesses, staring into Bumpy Johnson's cold, calm eyes, Sal Bonano felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child, hiding in a closet while his father beat his mother in the next room. Terror. Not the kind of terror that comes from physical pain. The kind that comes from realizing you've miscalculated badly, walked into something you don't understand, and there's no way out. The kind that comes from knowing you're going to die and there's nothing you can do about it. Bumpy smiled. That same smile from earlier, the one that said he already knew how this story ended. Then Bumpy Johnson said 6 words. 6 words that would echo through the criminal underworld for decades. 6 words that would be whispered in Little Italy and repeated in the Bronx and remembered in Brooklyn. Your uncle will bury you tomorrow. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Sal's face went pale. All the color drained from his cheeks like someone had opened a valve. What? You heard me, Bumpy said calmly. Sitting back down now, picking up his fork, cutting another piece of steak like they were discussing the weather. You walked into my restaurant, disrespected me, disrespected my wife, disrespected my people. And you think you're walking out of here? The 6 bodyguards raised their guns fully now. All 6 weapons aimed at Bumpy's head. Bumpy didn't even blink. You can shoot me, Bumpy said, chewing his steak. And maybe you'll kill me. Maybe. But the moment you pull those triggers, 40 people in this room will tear you apart. And even if you make it out, even if you somehow fight your way through that door and down that street, you think you're making it out of Harlem alive? The silence was absolute. The clock on the wall kept ticking. Someone near the kitchen was breathing shallow and quick. One of Sal's bodyguards was sweating through his expensive suit. "This is my city, Sal," Bumpy continued. "Every block, every corner, every alley, every rooftop, every basement, every doorway. I've got people everywhere. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Sal's hand was shaking, just barely, but in that silence, everyone could see it. The gun wavering, the mask cracking, the butcher becoming just another piece of meat. That's when Bumpy gave him the mercy he didn't deserve. "Or," Bumpy said softly, "you can apologize to my wife. Walk out of here with your men and never come back. Tell your uncle that if he wants Harlem, he can come himself. But he better bring more than 6 men." For 10 seconds, nobody moved. 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. The clock ticked. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. A car horn honked somewhere outside, in a world that suddenly seemed very far away. Then Sal Bonano lowered his weapon. His crew looked at him in shock, looked at each other. But Sal wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Mamie Johnson. "Mrs. Johnson," Sal said. His voice was barely audible, broken. Nothing like the theatrical boom he'd walked in with. "I apologize. That word. I shouldn't have said it. It was disrespectful. I'm sorry." Mamie didn't respond, just stared at him with those cold, unforgiving eyes, the eyes of a queen who just watched a peasant grovel. Sal backed away slowly. His crew followed him, weapons still out but lowered now. They moved toward the door like men walking away from a bomb they'd accidentally triggered. When Sal reached the door, he turned back one last time, tried to salvage something, anything. "This isn't over, Bumpy." Bumpy didn't even look up from his steak. "Yes, it is," he said calmly. "You just don't know it yet." Sal and his crew left. The door swung shut behind them with a sound like a coffin closing. For a moment, the restaurant stayed silent. Then someone started clapping. Slow at first. Then faster. Then everyone was clapping, standing, cheering. Bumpy Johnson had just stared down 6 armed mobsters without firing a single shot, without raising his voice, without even standing up for most of it. Mamie reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," Bumpy replied. "Respect is everything. You lose that, you lose everything." The jukebox started playing again. People went back to their meals. The crisis had passed. But everyone in that restaurant knew they'd just witnessed something they'd tell their grandchildren about. Sal Bonano left Harlem that night and never came back. Never set foot north of 110th Street again. 3 days later, the 5 families held an emergency meeting in a mansion in Manhattan, chandeliers hanging overhead like frozen fireworks. Men in $1,000 suits smoking cigars that cost more than a week's wages. Joe Bonano wanted revenge, wanted war, wanted Bumpy Johnson's head on a plate for humiliating his nephew, for making the Bonano name look weak, for proving that maybe, just maybe, the Italians didn't run every corner of New York after all. But Frank Costello, the man who really ran New York's underworld, the prime minister of organized crime, the kingmaker who'd survived longer than anyone by being smarter than everyone, he said something that changed everything. He stood up from the table, stubbed out his cigar, and spoke words that would become legend. "Bumpy Johnson runs Harlem because Harlem wants him to," Costello said. "We try to take it by force. We start a war we can't win. Not because we can't kill him. We can. Anybody can be killed. But we can't kill 40,000 people who'll die for him. We can't kill an idea. And that's what Bumpy Johnson is. He's an idea. The idea that black folks can protect their own, can build their own, can rule their own. You want to go to war with an idea? Leave Harlem alone. And they did. From that night forward, the Italian mob never tried to take over Harlem's numbers game again. They made deals, they negotiated, they showed respect. They treated Bumpy Johnson like what he was, an equal, a boss, a king in his own kingdom. The border at 110th Street became as real as any international boundary, respected by men who respected nothing else. Sal Bonano died in 1952. Heart attack, the official report said. He was 41 years old. Some people said it was natural, too much stress, too much rich food, too many cigarettes. Others said Bumpy had a long memory and patient hands. Nobody knows for sure, but here's what we do know. After that night in September 1948, nobody ever disrespected Bumpy Johnson in his own restaurant again. And that razor he put on the table, he never had to use it. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon a man has isn't made of steel. It's the loyalty of his people. It's the respect he's earned. It's the kingdom he's built not through fear, but through protecting those who can't protect themselves. Bumpy Johnson understood something the mob bosses with their armies and their money never learned. Power isn't just about how much violence you can inflict. It's about how much violence you don't have to inflict. It's about building something people want to defend. It's about earning loyalty that can't be bought or beaten out of someone. That's why when Sal Bonano walked into Wells' restaurant with 6 guns, he was already outgunned. He just didn't know it yet. He thought power came from weapons. Bumpy knew it came from people. 6 words. Your uncle will bury you tomorrow. That's all it took to send a killer running and change the power structure of New York City. Not a threat, a promise. And in Bumpy Johnson's world, promises were the only currency that mattered.